partisan political organization. For 100 years, we have encouraged informed and active participation in government and influenced public policy through education and advocacy. To remain nonpartisan, the League never supports or opposes political candidates or parties. We are pleased tonight to have our Spanish language interpreters, Rosabelle Rice and Kelly Music. For this November 2nd election, Boulder voters will be asked to fill 5 city council seats and vote on 3 citizen-initiated petitions and 5 city ballot measures. There are 5 council seats open for this election. The top 4 vote getters will receive 4-year terms, and the 5th vote getter will receive a 2-year term. Tonight's forum participants include Michael Christy, Mark Wallach, Tara Weiner, Nicole Spear, and Jaques Decalo. The format for tonight's forum will be as follows. Each candidate will have 1 minute for an opening statement. We will then begin with questions from our co-sponsor, Emergency Family Assistance Association, and then continue with questions that have been submitted online to the League by the community. Questions have been reviewed by our League of Women Voters volunteer screeners and will be addressed to all candidates. We will try to ask the candidates as many questions as time permits. Each candidate will have up to 1 minute or possibly an expanded amount of time to answer the question. As the moderator, I will let you know and I'll announce if the time has been increased from 1 minute. Mandy Nuku will be our timer. Please watch her screen for the timer signs. She'll hold up paddles. It's going to be very obvious. We will then finish with 1 minute closing statements. Now to the opening statements and questions. Again, unless otherwise noted, each candidate will have 1 minute to respond. Please watch for the timekeeper's signal at the 15-second mark and end when your time is up. If you are mid-sentence when your time is up, please promptly finish that sentence so we can move on to the next candidate. All right, let's start the fun. For the opening statements, we will begin with candidate Christy.
All right, thank you to the League of Women Voters and Effa. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to you all tonight. My name is Michael Christy. I'm running for Boulder City Council. I'm running because I believe that I have the character, the leadership ability, the core values, and a unique skill set to be an active and effective voice at the table in moving our city in a positive direction. I am a family law lawyer by trade, a certified mediator, and a certified collaborative law lawyer. I have deep roots in public service. I was a JAG officer in the United States Air Force and deployed to Kuwait and Afghanistan shortly after 9/11. I was an intern at the White House during the Clinton administration. For the past 3.5 years, I've been a volunteer at the Boulder Shelter for the Homeless. I am a volunteer at Boulder's Community Mediation and Resolution Center, and I currently sit on Boulder's Cannabis Licensing and Advisory Board. My hope is to bring a skill set, particularly as a mediator, to bring people together who have very opposing viewpoints and help them find some common ground and come to reasonable solutions. Thank you.
Candidate Wallach.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you to our host. My name is Mark Wallach, and I'm running for re-election to the City Council, having served for the past 2 years. I have tried to serve as a critically thinking and conscientious member of the council, and I'm very proud of the fact that despite the varying views of the council members, I have been endorsed by each and every member of the current City Council. As I said, I'm very proud of that. Tonight, we will discuss a number of key issues for the next election, and I hope to give you a little more detail about my views on some of those. But again, I am hoping to serve for another 2 years or 4 years, depending upon the will of the voters. And I look forward to speaking with you tonight. Thank you.
Candidate Weiner.
Hi, I'm Tara Weiner. As you know, I'm running for Boulder City Council. I moved to Boulder with my husband and 3 daughters about 10 years ago. 5 years ago, I was appointed to my first city working group called the Chautauqua Access Management Plan. We were tasked with solving some of Chautauqua's traffic congestion problems, and we came up with the Park to Park shuttle. After that, I was appointed to the city by the city to the Community Culture and Safety Tax Working Group. That was in 2017, and we helped fund such great projects as the Scar Carpenter Pool remodel and Meals on Wheels and community cycles. I currently serve on the Boulder Parks and Rec Advisory Board, as well as the Downtown Boulder Community Initiatives Board, where we work on bringing the downtown back after COVID. I have a combination of City of Boulder experience, but also I've been running my own business for 25 plus years, solving manufacturing and logistics problems every day, where I've learned how to collaborate with others and think through decisions with pragmatism, as well as listening to different opinions, because you might have a better idea than I do. So I want to know what your opinion is. I go door to door, and I've met so many of you who care so much and know so much, and I want to get to know you better. So please reach out to me at boulder.com, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Candidate Speer.
Thank you all for being here tonight. And thank you to Effa and the League of Women Voters for putting this candidate forum together. My name is Dr. Nicole Spear. My husband and I arrived in Boulder to work at CU, and I've worked there for most of my 16 years in Boulder. I currently manage a brain imaging research facility in the Institute of Cognitive Science at CU Boulder. I'm also a PhD scientist, a mom, and an avid volunteer. I'm an active member of First Congregational Church, the Boulder County NAACP, and my workers union, United Campus Workers Colorado. I volunteer with local homelessness services connector Feet Forward. I was a member of the Bixby School Board of Trustees from 2016 to 2021, and I've helped raise millions of dollars for Boulder nonprofits over the past few years. As a leader, I don't shy away from hard problems, and I'll bring my courage and inclusive leadership to City Council. These aren't easy times, but I'm ready to use my skills and expertise to help us make progress on challenges such as affordable housing, equity and social justice, and the climate emergency. Thank you.
Candidate Decalo.
Good evening. My name is Jaques Decalo. I'm running for Boulder City Council on an environmental platform. I was born and raised in Boulder, and I believe that Boulder needs to do more to combat climate change. We can be a leader in the state to have rippling effects across the state and across the country. As a climate activist, I've been to Standing Rock. I've marched in streets of downtown Denver and where I went to school in Bellingham on behalf of environmental science and studies and sustainability. I've also marched for women's rights when the Women's March was happening after Trump was elected, and then last summer with the Black Lives Matter marches. I believe that we need to have a leader who's on the front line, who's actively trying to make a difference and vocalizing the difference that needs to be created. If elected to City Council, I want to increase solar, battery storage technology, gray water recycling, and implement a fee on single-use plastic to do everything we can to combat climate change. Thank you.
Now, I would like to introduce Julie Van Dammelin, the Executive Director of Effa. She will be asking the first 4 forum questions.
Thank you, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for inviting Effa to co-sponsor this event. And thank you to the candidates for running. I know how hard it is to be an elected official. I was one, and so I have my hats off to for you throwing your hats into the ring. For those of you who may not know Effa, Emergency Family Assistance Association, we have a long trajectory in the community. I just heard that League of Women Voters is 100 years old. Well, Effa is 103 years old, locally grown out of the Spanish flu pandemic, actually. So we've been a frontline safety net agency for a century in this in the city of Boulder and in Boulder County more broadly. We are a family resource center. Our focus is on stabilizing people in crisis or who can't make ends meet through our food bank, financial assistance. We've been on the front lines of the safety net response to COVID in the community. And we have housing for families with kids that are going through homelessness, and long-term kind of more deeper impact work with people moving out of poverty. So that's what we do. And I get 4 questions, which is wonderful. And just to warm it up, the first question is a yes or no. So there'll be lots of time to dive into details. But I'd like to know if you would support raising the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour in the city of Boulder. Why or why not?
For this first question, we'll start with candidate Wallach.
I'm always interested in raising the minimum wage. I think all workers deserve the opportunity to live on the salaries that they're making. There's always some pushback on that. Businesses are rightfully concerned about their economics, but it turns out that every time the minimum wage is raised, everyone adjusts and the world does not come to an end. So I am always responsive to that. I think a $15 minimum wage is appropriate. Its time has come, and yes, I would be more than happy to support that.
Next, candidate Weiner.
I definitely support raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. It's necessary for us to have a livable wage so that people don't have to get 2 jobs, so they can just work regular hours, take care of their families, take care of their children.
Candidate Speer.
Yes, absolutely, yes. The National Low Income Housing Coalition released a report earlier this year that the hourly wage needed to afford a 2-bedroom rental in Boulder is $33.15 an hour. Now, not everybody needs a 2-bedroom rental, but clearly even $15 an hour is leaving folks like single parents in a really precarious financial position. One area I and some of the other candidates have been talking about is wealth disparity and the power of wages to offset the income gap. Especially as a union member, I'm a strong advocate for living wages that enable people to afford housing, childcare, and other living expenses. But the issue is really bigger than Boulder. Across the country, our communities subsidize corporations that don't pay their workers a living wage. When workers aren't paid enough to afford childcare, housing, food, transportation, and healthcare, our communities pick up the slack through food banks, rental assistance, and other publicly funded programs. This isn't just or equitable, and I don't know how City Council can fix this, but it's a major problem for me.
Next, candidate Decalo.
I'm in favor of raising the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour, if not more. The cost of living in Boulder has skyrocketed, and the value of the dollar has, kind of lost it's dwindled with inflation. So $15 an hour might not even be enough. So we have to look at closer to 18 or 20. Thank you.
Candidate Christy. You're on mute right now.
Sorry. Yes, I support raising the minimum wage in Boulder to $15 an hour. I believe we need higher wages to allow people of all socioeconomic classes to continue to live in Boulder. But we also need more affordable housing. Just raising the minimum wage is not going to solve the problem. And I question, even to Jaques and Nicole's point, whether $15 an hour is sufficient as we look at what we can do to help those in our community who are most vulnerable. Increasing our minimum wage is a step we can take to help support the lowest wage earners in Boulder and help them thrive in our community. But low wages are also harming our local businesses because their employees cannot afford to live here. We need to provide more affordable housing for people to live here. Boulder Housing Partners does a great job providing lower income affordable housing, and we want to make sure that Boulder Housing Partners continues to do this through commercial linkage fees. If we build moderate to middle income housing, we're also gaining on the back end through the cash in lieu program, which funds Boulder Housing Partners to provide more affordable housing for lower income families.
All right, Julie, we're ready for your next question.
Well, this is kind of a follow-up. A couple of you mentioned income inequality, and this is the focus of this next question more broadly. So the city of Boulder has a very high degree of income inequality. What specific actions would you support to make Boulder more equitable and inclusive for all income levels? And more equitable among income?
For this question, we'll start with candidate Weiner.
I'm very excited about the Boulder's equity plan that we have right now. It's so encouraging to see equity, everything being looked at through the eyes of equity. I know on the Parks Department, we got to be involved with some actual workshops that showed us and taught us so much. And I think changing people's minds and the way they look at things in education is crucial. As far as what I do, I'm going to agree with Michael that housing is the number one thing. When I go door to door, the people who have rentals, they just cannot, they can barely afford to live here, especially single moms with kids and single families. And so we're losing our diversity. That is why we're losing our diversity. So we need to absolutely double down and build housing for all different income levels, because diversity is what makes a city great. That's what makes it exciting to live here. If everybody was alike, Boulder would not be fun. So we have to push ahead and do what we need to do in terms of getting housing for people that need it and that can't afford the current housing.
Candidate Speer.
I'm going to echo some of the previous conversation about housing. I think this is one of the biggest things we can address to make some progress here. Housing is a major cost for people who work in Boulder, and as housing costs increase, more and more people are rent burdened. I think our crisis is bad enough that we need to have every option on the table. Expanding occupancy limits, as bedrooms will do, ADUs, housing vouchers, rental assistance, and doing more to support purchasing existing units specifically to keep them affordable, as Boulder Housing Partners is doing. We also need to be helping people navigate our complicated system of accessing housing support. I was talking with a single mom who said that as a single mother who worked, it took an incredible amount of time and effort to get into affordable housing. We shouldn't make accessing housing so hard for the people who need the most support. That's inequitable. Making sure our city processes are streamlined and investing in navigators to help people use city services can help us serve our most vulnerable community members a little bit better. Thanks.
Next, candidate Decalo.
Yeah, housing is definitely the issue at hand here. We have to look at the city taking control of some housing, looking into land trusts where the city can regulate houses on the land, have rent control and price controls of sales of the houses. Occupancy limits have to be looked at. I don't think that we should let it, just completely go with bedrooms are for people, because I think, students are going to be the ones who benefit from that over than residents in the community, because students are able to pay higher rates of rent because they have their own income, their parents' income, and then their student loans or grants. So we have to look at zoning in areas where students don't tend to live and allow it there. And then we have to look at the lottery system for affordable housing. I think, it's not the most accurate way to include a diverse community. We have to prioritize people who have been in the community for long periods of time, who have given back to the community, who bring in a cultural difference, who bring in a diverse background into Boulder. Thank you.
Next, candidate Christy.
Yeah, so, one thing we can do is what we just talked about, and that is increase Boulder's minimum wage. Another step I think we can take is, again, making housing more attainable for low and moderate income households. We can accomplish this through the voter-approved down payment assistance program. We can also put cash in lieu money to work in as many places as possible. I also believe that we should be working collaboratively with Boulder Housing Partners to look at purchasing older run-down apartments at market rate, renovating apartments, and then making them permanently affordable. We also need to ensure that our communities have access to affordable and reliable broadband service. We saw during COVID too many underrepresented children falling behind in school because they did not have reliable internet service. And we can also expand on the Boulder Connectors program to establish relationships with underrepresented communities so that they feel welcome in this community and that they know they have a voice at the table. Thank you.
Candidate Wallach.
I think Tara is correct. The equity instrument that we have initiated at the Boulder City government is a good first step, every program, every contract is viewed through an equity lens. And I think that's a good initial program for moving along towards a more inclusive community. Obviously, we do need more affordable housing. One of my objectives is to take a look at our municipal airport, because I would like to decommission it. That 180 acres could provide over 2,500 affordable and middle income units for the community. And that would really move the needle in a way that most other things would not. So that's something I would like to pursue if I am elected to a second term. And I hope to be able to do that. Thank you.
All right, next question from Julie.
Similar to across the country, we've observed here in Boulder that frontline workers, low-income households, families with children, and people of color were the hardest hit by the COVID pandemic. And we know that we're not out of this yet. So it's kind of a two-part question. What actions would you support to provide an effective safety net to continue to address the effects of the pandemic, as well as what would be your priorities for resources used for recovery of those households?
For this question, we'll begin with candidate Speer.
One of the things that I think about in times of crisis, when we need a really quick response, is that it can often take too much precious time to reinvent the wheel. So generally, my approach in crisis situations is to support any actions that can get more resources more quickly to groups in the community and in our city that are already doing the work. In this case, of providing a safety net and resources for the hardest hit households. I think that giving more resources to groups that are already set up is often the best way to go when dealing with a crisis. So in our community, that's groups like Effa, the YWCA, our school district, childcare providers. They're the ones who are in a position where they can quickly connect families with things like rental assistance, food, and childcare. So nurturing those networks and making sure that we have good communication between them, as well as having resources can be really helpful. As I mentioned in my last response, this also means having more navigators who can help people learn about and connect with existing resources, especially as the need for more services increases. Thanks.
Candidate Decalo.
I agree with Nicole that we have to give more resources to existing infrastructure that supports these people at risk. We also have to look at supporting small businesses and the small businesses that have employees who they can no longer afford to pay or continue to keep on a wage. So we have to look at supporting them as well. The city has some reserves as well, but it's also a federal issue. We have to look at the federal government to increase reserves to these people as well, make it more affordable to them. But that takes time. And so if another pandemic was to hit immediately, we'd have to look at what we have locally. And so supporting small businesses, supporting the existing infrastructure, and then also looking at community outreach and having available areas for people to just reach out to the city and say, hey, I need help. Can you point me in the right direction? I think that's something that we kind of lack. So having more community outreach, and then also having outreach for people with language barriers as well is really huge, because a lot of people impacted might not be fluent in English and might feel at a disadvantage compared to the rest of people. Thank you.
Next, candidate Christy. Next is candidate Christy.
Sorry, Martina, I didn't realize you had called on me. I think what we should do is let's look at what we learned from COVID. We know that the city has the ability to work fast and efficiently to help those most in need. The city received about $20 million in ARPA funds, and we still have money left to allocate from those funds. We saw that with the use of ARPA funds and the moratorium on evictions, we were able to keep vulnerable households in secure and stable housing throughout the pandemic. We need to continue to support rental, utility, and landlord assistance programs. Let's continue to allocate these monies with a focus on our most vulnerable communities and businesses. This includes restaurant recovery programs like the closing of West Pearl Street. We should be working collaboratively with Effa and the Human Services Alliance to see what is needed, what's working, what has not worked in the past, and allow them to continue to provide the safety nets that they provide to those most in need. We need to ensure that funding sources like ARPA funds are distributed equitably. We can also use ARPA funds to support our Boulder Connectors program with a focus on minority businesses to make sure that they're getting the support that they need. Thank you.
Candidate Wallach.
Well, in the past year, Boulder has initiated a rental assistance and legal assistance program that was approved by a citizen initiative in 2019. And we're expecting that to generate about $1.5 million a year. And I think that's an extremely valuable program. And as a matter of fact, the city has been funding that program in advance of anticipated tax receipts. So I think that's a major step forward. Obviously, evictions are a major issue in town. I'm very pleased with the fact that Boulder Housing Partners has a program where they have evicted no one during COVID, and at least not for economic reasons. And so I think those are both programs that are very, very valuable in terms of protecting those of lower income and underserved communities.
Candidate Weiner.
No, when you go almost last, everybody says everything you were going to say. I'm just throwing that out there. Thanks, everybody, for your great comments. I'm going to agree with everybody here. For me, I'm very excited about the ARPA funds. What a life, what a godsend, really. It's going to help so many people. I agree with all that the rental assistance program, the eviction protection, whatever. I think we have to put our most vulnerable and our marginalized people first when it comes to COVID. I also agree about flexibility of the city to be able to pare down its rules and change its rules so that we can be there for the small businesses like we need to, especially the restaurants, which were the hardest hit. We also need to support community connectors. A lot of us have talked about it, but it really does a great job in this city for those that have these language barriers. And I think for me, I believe that there's a fair amount of people that don't know where to get help. So the community connectors are some of the crucial people that will help the most vulnerable and the marginalized know where they can go for this help, because the ARPA funds, the money will be there.
We're ready for the next question.
Sorry, first I want to thank you all for your thoughtful responses. My last, and if anyone knows me, this is kind of one of my, I'm happy to be able to ask this question because this is an issue that doesn't get talked about very often. But each year, hundreds of children and their families go through episodes of homelessness in the city of Boulder. City council discussions tend to focus solely on encampments and adult homelessness issues. If elected, what specific actions are you willing to take to raise and address the issue of child homelessness in the city of Boulder?
Thank you. I think that's a great question. I think one thing we really need to focus on is how we can have outreach to help these people get motivated to, want to, or I guess not get motivated, but how can we assist them to get back on their feet? How can we assist them to get a job, become more stable? If their parents are struggling with addiction or mental health issues, that's a problem for the child as well. So we have to look at resources to helping the parents become more stable and being able to provide for these children. I feel like community outreach with therapists and first responders and people who are experienced in the field of increasing these people's ability to build a better life for themselves is important. So we have to look at how we can put the right people in the right situations to build relations with these families. Because once we can build relations with these families, understand what they're going through, understand what they need, then we can get those resources together to better build that. Thank you.
Candidate Christy.
Yeah, wow. It's you're right. You don't hear about children experiencing homelessness, and so my understanding is that about 40% of Boulder's unhoused population is families. I have young children of my own, and I can only imagine the psychological impact that losing your home would have on one of my children if we were in that situation. Just as Boulder supports Boulder Housing Partners and BVSD and working close with them to close that digital gap for children, I think we should be doing the same, partner with BVSD and with Effa and other nonprofits to look for signs that a child is close to or experiencing homelessness, because the sooner we recognize the signs, the sooner we can get that child out of homelessness and reduce the negative impact that child will suffer as a result of being unhoused. It's about community, parental engagement between our schools and families, and being aware. We need our teachers to recognize the signs so that they can address them as quickly as possible. We need to look at increasing our funding for Effa and other nonprofits to help keep children and families out of homelessness. And this may mean more funds get out.
Candidate Wallach.
We know that the best practice for homelessness is housing. And that's why our policy in Boulder has been housing first. And if there's a priority within that housing first category, it ought to be families with children or children without families. Either way, we need to put people into housing because that is the best and most practiced way of getting them on a path towards greater stability and greater economic security. So I'm always happy to try to increase our resources towards that housing first policy. We know that it works. We know it's the one thing that seems to work. And to the extent that we need more resources, I'm always happy to try to get those resources available.
Candidate Weiner.
Just yesterday in my door-to-door, somebody brought up to me that there were teenagers at Fairview High School that were actually living in their cars behind there and that they were homeless. And that just broke my heart, that in 2021, we would have this problem. I think about Together, which is formerly Attention Homes, and the work that they do. When you visit, I visited there, I was awestruck at the impact that they're making, and they're able to act, and it's so successful that their model is being followed in other cities as well. So when I hear about this, I feel I'm going to agree with Mark that when it comes to this problem, housing is the most important thing, and we need to put families and children first. I think that you're not always aware of it because, like you said, people just think about the encampments and they don't think about this other side. It is just heartbreaking. And I feel as a city council, we need to come together and make some big impacts.
Candidate Speer.
Thanks for this question. I agree with Mark that we really need to get families housed and keep families housed. And I also appreciate Tara's noting for children who are living on their own, that we really do need some specific spaces for them to shelter. I really appreciate groups like Effa and Together that offer rental assistance and spaces for that purpose. This, of course, kind of comes back to the idea of making faster progress on our affordable housing crisis, but really we need short-term solutions because there are people who are suffering now. We also need to give people the ability to meet and even exceed their expenses in the long term, which comes back to paying people a living wage, more affordable transportation options, and advocating at the state and federal level for universal childcare. We can also help families navigate these complicated local, county, state, and federal systems. But we also need our state and federal leaders to advocate for more appropriate levels of funding for child mental health care, which can lead to homelessness for older children and adolescents. And working with schools and families to create a welcoming community for LGBTQ youth is another way that we can help here.
Thank you. And thank you, Julie Van Dammelin, for the questions from Effa.
I just want to pause a second to ask or respond to the request from the interpreter if we can just slow down our responses just a little bit so they can catch all what you're saying. Thanks, everybody.
Great. We will now begin the portion of the forum with the community submitted questions. The first question, we will give a 90-second response time. The question is, are you for or against the Bedrooms Are for People ballot initiative? Please explain why. The questioner is concerned that there are, quote, no affordability, density, or parking requirements, unquote, in the initiative. To add context, this question is referring to ballot question 300. This would allow all Boulder housing units to be occupied by a number of people equal to the number of legal bedrooms plus one additional person per home, provided that all relevant health and safety codes are met. We'll begin with candidate Christy, and again, we have 90 seconds.
So I do not support bedrooms are for people. I do not believe that that measure will result in lower rents. To the contrary, that measure will raise rents and for sale prices across our city. The measure does not address housing affordability. And in fact, the measure moves the needle in the opposite direction. For example, a landlord with a 4-bedroom house getting $1,000 from each of 3 tenants under current law will now get $1,000 per tenant from 5 tenants if the measure passes. Moreover, there is nothing in that measure preventing a landlord from expanding a 4-bedroom house to say a 6 or 10-bedroom house and collecting even more rent. If the measure passes, I believe we're going to see an increase in housing values as more and more investors recognize the positive cash flows being generated from these rental units, and investors will continue to pay top dollar to purchase these units, which in turn are going to drive up housing prices and push the middle income households out of the market. Further, the measure does not take into account that some neighborhoods are already at carrying capacity and cannot take on more population density. That's the very reason that Boulder's occupancy limits were put in place more than 50 years ago. Denver has already rejected this same concept because it created too much inequality for lower income families trying to obtain housing. I do not support this measure.
Next, candidate Wallach.
I also do not support this measure for many of the same reasons that Michael articulated. It will eliminate what were previously family rentals in small homes because it'll be more financially attractive to rent them out as student housing. It will intensify the influx of investment capital into Boulder to convert homes into investment properties. It will have a disproportionate impact on certain neighborhoods like Martin Acres, Goss Grove, and Uni Hill. There is no affordability requirement. And I note that in some cities, such as Austin, they raised their occupancy limits to 6, and the experience was so terrible, they took it back down to 4. It is not uncommon for university towns to have some form of occupancy limit on their homes, and I think that's appropriate for Boulder as well. We can have a conversation as to what that occupancy level should be, but this measure does not properly address those concerns. And as Michael also said, there's no density limit at all. So this is not a measure that I can support.
Candidate Weiner.
You know, I like the concept of bedrooms are for people. I initially, in its first round years ago, did sign my name to that petition. But I wish that it wouldn't be bedrooms plus 1. I wish it would just be maybe 4 bedrooms, because we do need to modernize our occupancy rules, but that is a big jump. I think my biggest fear is this. I'm worried. I'm a mother and a grandmother, so I worry a lot. And this is what I'm worried about. When I was walking door to door in Martin Acres, this mom with a single mom with kids was worried that she wouldn't be able to compete with the students if this passes, because the students are going to be able to afford $1,000 a bedroom, like somebody already said. And she, let's say, can only afford, let's say, $2,500 instead of $3,000. And she feels she's going to get priced out by the students. So that is what worries me the most. If certain neighborhoods like Martin Acres were exempt, I would be a lot more relaxed about it, or if we could do a pilot program just to see how it works out. So again, I do think we should modernize our occupancy limits. I am worried about some of the consequences, especially for the single moms with kids.
Candidate Speer.
I am for bedrooms are for people and will be voting yes on Measure 300. One of the hardest to learn lessons as I've made myself more capable of social justice work has been trusting that the people most affected by the issues are the ones who will have the best solutions to the problems. Bedrooms is supported by so many groups that advocate for housing for those with the lowest incomes and the most precarious living situations, like Effa. It's backed by volunteer hours of hundreds of renters who are underrepresented in our city's decision-making, even though they make up a majority of our population. For me, as someone coming from a place of relative privilege, my job on issues is to listen to the voices of groups that are often underrepresented in our community's decisions when I make my decisions. The groups supporting this measure are intelligent, equity-focused, and thoughtful. They would not back something that would do their communities more harm than good. This is a place where I, as a white homeowner, feel I need to use my privilege not to second guess the recommendations of those with less privilege than me, but to courageously follow their lead. Thank you.
Candidate Decalo.
As it stands, I do not support the proposition bedrooms are for people, just because I think it leaves too much room for unexpected consequences. Like I said earlier in a couple questions that Tara just brought up, is that students are going to be the winners here. It's not going to be the families. It's not going to be the single mom with 2 kids who has to feed her kids, and also has to pay rent in Boulder. So I think it's unfortunate that, it's come to a vote, and I'm all for democracy. So, that's the way it's going to go. But I wish we went back and looked at, reducing co-op costs, looking at the application to get a co-op and have these people who have 4 bedrooms but want 6 people to live there because they're couples, to be able to do that without costing them $4,000. There was a lot of other ways we could have gone about this. We need to look at zoning regulations for areas that are going to be higher impacted by this, areas like Martin Acres and the Hill, and those areas that, are already facing density issues and don't have the street parking, and people in the Hill neighborhoods are already complaining about the students taking over, and it's just going to continue to get worse. So I fear that it's going to be a bigger problem than everybody's expecting. Thank you.
A note from one of our interpreters: when you are reading your responses, try not to speak so quickly. The interpreters would love that if you slow down your read responses just a tid. The next question: where do you stand on gun control? How will you enforce gun safety? Now that the Senate Bill 256 has given municipalities the possibility of passing gun safety ordinances that are more strict than state laws, do you propose to introduce or support any gun ordinances if you are elected to City Council? We'll start with candidate Wallach.
This is actually a pretty easy question for me because I am very much in favor of more restrictive gun control legislation. But we also have to be a little bit realistic about this. I am very happy to ban assault weapons or reinstitute our assault weapon ban, but we do have to acknowledge that people are going to go to Wyoming to buy the weapons they can't buy here. But I'm also in favor of statutes to permit us to intervene and take away weapons from those who are mentally ill. I am not a friend of guns. I have no problem with people who want to maintain weapons for home security, or those who want to have weapons for hunting purposes. But there is absolutely no justification in my mind for weapons of war. And there's no reasonable purpose to have an AR-15 in your home with a large capacity magazine. So I'm in favor of all restrictions that are reasonable.
Candidate Weiner.
I got the distinction, moms demand action distinction. I know a lot of us did, so I wanted to say that it's called Moms Demand Action Gun Sense Candidate Distinction. So I'm happy that I got that. I will say that when it comes to gun control. I'm a big proponent of gun control. My sister's best friend was one of the victims in King Soopers. And I think what we need to remember is the victims are still people. And sometimes when we have debates, we forget that. I actually left her contact information and phone in my phone so that I could always remember and fight for gun safety and fight for people's lives. You know, when you go on Facebook and so many people talk about the loved ones that they've lost. And I think if we keep this in mind, that these are people that we know, that I miss, we can really go forward and be strong and get something done here in this state.
Candidate Speer.
Thank you. I, like Tara and some of the other candidates, am a Moms Demand Action Gun Sense candidate of distinction for this election cycle. I would support reinstating the assault weapons ban and prohibiting the carrying of firearms in the city. I support educating residents on safe gun storage, as well as advocating for more mental health services. I have lost friends to suicide, and I know that a large majority of suicides arise from guns. I'd like to find out how we can ensure that people have easier access to affordable and adequate mental health care than they have access to guns. This requires advocating for more state and federal support for mental health care, particularly inpatient and emergency mental health services. And I really appreciate and support the work of some of our state representatives like Judy Amabile for pushing this forward and trying to get us better access to mental health care.
Jaques, candidate Decalo.
Yeah, thank you. I'm all in favor of a assault weapon ban. I think that's very important, especially in a city. You know, there's no need for a killing weapon. One thing I'm worried about is ghost guns. I don't know if you guys know what these are, but they're home-built guns made with bought parts off the internet, and then you can also 3D print components. So there's no way to track these guns being built. There's no way to track who's building these guns. So you know, we have to look into deeper regulations of buying components to guns, not even the guns themselves. Another thing is looking into mental health, deeper mental health background checks. I think that's a huge thing. You know, access to guns is still pretty available for most people, so more inclusive background checks. And then mental health awareness is a huge thing as well, similar to what Nicole said about making it more available to people who feel like they're, you know, close to the edge and need someone to talk to and don't have the resources or can't tell their parents, can't tell their friends. We need to have that outlet for them. Thank you.
Candidate Christy.
So I too, like Tara and Nicole, have the distinction of a gun sense candidate by Moms Demand Action. I stand for strong gun control measures and would like to see the city of Boulder reinstitute the assault weapons ban. Current federal law only requires licensed gun dealers to conduct background checks. I support background checks on all gun sales. So that would be guns sold online, gun shows. I support red flag laws, allowing family members to petition the court to have a judge restrict someone's access to firearms. As a family law lawyer, I've had several domestic violence cases. I fully support and see the need for laws prohibiting gun possession by abusers and closing the boyfriend loophole, which allows abusers to keep their guns simply because they were never married to their victim. I support safe gun storage laws and building public awareness about secure gun storage. And I also support the prohibition of permitless carry laws. Thank you.
Next question, and this is a quote from the questioner. My family, my neighbors, and so many others are upset about crime, upset about lawlessness and public health and safety issues. What are your thoughts about effective ways to keep safe from criminal behavior? How can City Council meaningfully address these crucial issues? Please be specific. This question is 90 seconds. We'll start with candidate Weiner.
You know, since COVID, The jails are closed. That hasn't really worked out well for us. You know, our property crime is high. It's through the roof. And when sometimes I think about property crime, I think about the amount of bicycles are being stolen. And two problems with that. One, it has to do with equity, because people can't, not all people can afford to just buy another bike, and that is their mode of transportation. And also, if we're going to become carbon neutral and we want to push people to ride bikes more, we need to have safety. We need to have security for our bicycles. So one of the things I want to do is to make a dent in the bicycle theft problem and in property crime problem. I think that as we open up more from COVID, we will see less crime. However, we do have to make it a priority because it affects everybody. Kids who can't ride their bikes to school, people, kids who go to Boulder High School, they're sometimes worried about crime right now. There definitely needs to be, in my opinion, a push towards safety, because safety is important for everybody. And it's what a government is supposed to do, is to keep our people safe.
Candidate Speer.
I think she may have dropped
She
off.
lost power. She just
okay.
texted me. She'll be back.
Okay.
Yeah, my light just flickered as well. I can testify.
For battery storage technology and solar panels.
We'll skip to candidate Christy and then circle back when she can join.
Yeah, since the pandemic, we've seen an increase in crime anywhere from 30% to 243%, depending on the crime. We need to expand on the resources and support necessary to keep our neighborhoods, our businesses, our public spaces, and our residents safe. I believe one step in the right direction is to have a fully staffed police force of 190 officers. Right now, our police force is down about 40 officers. Chief Harold has said that the one thing that she needs most to allow her department to do their jobs is more officers. On the homelessness front, we need to prioritize the one thing that the data shows to work, and that is a housing first strategy. But our city has limited resources. The city cannot do this alone. We need help at the county level, the state level, and from the federal government. Our state representative, Judy Amabile, secured approximately $450 million in ARPA funds to help her in setting up regional mental health and drug addiction facilities. And with the opioid settlement monies coming in, Boulder should see about $500,000 a year plus more to the county. These funds can be used to help get people off the streets and into the services that they need. But as a city, we cannot do this by ourselves. We need help from other sources.
Candidate Speer, welcome back. We can circle back to you.
This is still the question about public safety. Is that the right one?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I apologize. I'm back on from my phone because our internet is down due to a power blip. So being a scientist, I really appreciate Chief Harold's data-based crime science approach to public safety. We need our police to address poverty, theft, and violent crime. Is trained to do the work necessary to address these specific issues. The concerns that I hear about most from residents are bike thefts, car thefts, and violent behavior. Although most crimes have stabilized this year and returned to 5-year levels, property crimes are still going up. My biggest concern is in how we can prioritize decreasing property crimes, as well as how we can make sure that our police have the resources they need to protect us from violent crimes. As the March shooting showed us, we're not immune from national issues, such as the growing threat of gun violence and violence from domestic terrorists. We really need our police to be able to address these really concerning public safety issues. To do this, I think our city can do a better job outside of law enforcement with the issues that are taking our police department's time away from protecting our property and dealing with violent crime, namely homelessness and nuisance complaints. If council can do that, Chief Harold and her officers can better address the property and violent crimes that are most concerning for all of us. Thank you.
Candidate Wallach.
You know, it's an interesting question. When I first ran in 2019, I don't think I said a word about public safety. It was not even an issue in this city. Now it is probably the most prominent issue in Boulder. So the first step, obviously, for me is to bring back our police department to its full complement of officers, as Michael suggested. And we have these sterile debates over defunding the police. Due to COVID, we have effectively done that, and the results have been terrible. We cut the budget. We had to cut the budget by 7%. And through attrition, we've lost the 40 officers. We need to restore the department to its full funding and its full complement of officers so that they can do what we ask them to do, which is to protect our community, protect our businesses, protect our employees. I get a lot of emails about people who fear walking on the Boulder Creek path. They won't bring their kids there. They won't bike, hike, run. That's not acceptable to me. Our public lands need to be made safe for the public. I believe our community needs to be safe at their homes, safe on our lands, and businesses need to be safe at their place of employ. And that's something I feel very strongly about, and I've made that a central point of my campaign this year. Thanks.
Here is the next question.
Oh, I didn't get to go.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's all right. I'll make it quick. So the biggest issue is definitely restaffing our police to full capacity. That's something that I think we can all agree on. And the next is, homeless outreach and having outreach for these people that isn't the police officers that are actually, similar to what Denver has with its STAR program, having people like that replace first responder police with first responder therapists and mental health associates and people who can help get these people to conversate and discuss the issues going on and try and calm them down rather than get them more riled up with police officers and making them feel afraid or threatened or something like that. And then we have to look at, the other areas that police officers are called to, like nuisance complaints on the Hill. We have to have either community patrol on the Hill, or we have to get the college students to agree via contract that they are going to abide by certain rules that are non-disruptive. And if they do break these rules, then they're going to be punished by the city and the university themselves. So we have to take other steps that aren't just necessarily increasing spending. I think there's a lot of other ways we can do that. And then, the homeless people along the creek is a pretty big issue. And it's really building relations with them and getting them to understand that this isn't their area to pollute. I literally picked up a heroin needle out of the creek this summer. So I think we need to do everything we can to make sure that it's a safe space for every person of all age groups to enjoy. Thank you.
Did I miss anyone? I want to make sure we're comprehensive. Okay. Here is the next question. In 2016, City Council unanimously approved an Indigenous Peoples Day resolution, which commits to the city to correct omissions of the Native American presence in places, resources, and cultural programming. What should the city do to build positive relationships with Indigenous people and nations? Specifically, should Boulder memorialize the Fort Chambers site and its ties to the Sand Creek Massacre? We'll begin with candidate Speer.
Thank you for this question. For me, the most important thing here is really supporting the will of the Native tribes whose men, women, and children were massacred by Boulder's volunteer cavalrymen. Some of the tribes have asked that this land be preserved as a place to teach
Candidate Spear, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Indigenous peoples in the Boulder Valley. The Arapaho people are honored in their homeland. Right? And I think it's really important for OSM. Let me try getting a little closer. I apologize. I think my phone is not working well for this. Can you hear me any better?
We can hear you. It's
Can
just
you
going
hear me?
in and out a
Okay.
in and out a bit.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. Let me try something
Okay.
different. I really apologize for this. So should I start again? Should I just continue where I was? Is that any better?
Yes,
okay.
that is. Thank you.
OSMP is developing a management plan for the Fort Chambers site, and I think it's really important to recognize the unique historical, cultural, and spiritual value of this site to the Arapaho and Cheyenne people. I'd really like to follow the direction of Indigenous leaders during the planning process, and I really appreciate the work that Right Relationship Boulder is doing in this regard. Thank you.
Candidate Decalo.
Yeah, I think it would be a great idea if the Arapaho people, the Arapaho Nation, wanted the land back, that we give it to them as a recognition of the genocide that we caused their nation and many other nations across this stolen land. One thing that I saw, what was really cool, I know this doesn't really have to do with our country, but the Toronto Raptors and Toronto Maple Leafs before every game now are going to recognize that they're on Indigenous land. I think that'd be something to do before, community events, is give recognition to the land and the people that were here before us. One thing we definitely have to do is increase education in the school systems with BVSD, have more teachings of Indigenous culture and Indigenous heritage. We have to work with Indigenous leaders from different nations surrounding the area to make sure that the curriculum taught is up to their standards and make sure that their message is heard. We have to work with the Indigenous leaders of the Arapaho Nation, the Cheyenne Nation, and all across the U.S. to make sure that everything is heard in a proper stance.
Candidate Christy.
So regarding the establishment of positive relations, currently the City and Human Relations Commission are collaborating with a tribal nation working group to establish a land acknowledgement, which I think can be used as a starting point for improving relations with Indigenous people. Settlers Park was recently renamed the People's Crossing after consultation with tribal representatives. Another possibility is for the city, in collaboration with CU, to offer free use of large venues for tribal meetings and festivals. As for the memorialization of Fort Chambers, due to the spiritual and also the traumatic nature of this site, its memorialization, I believe, should be driven by the Arapaho and Cheyenne tribes. Right Relationship Boulder has done extensive work around this site based on the input of tribal leaders. I would also highly recommend for people watching this Zoom forum to watch the presentation through the Museum of Boulder. It's called the Fort Chambers, a call for Boulder to reckon with our history and build right relationships.
Candidate Wallach.
Currently, the city does meet with tribal leaders on an annual basis, and those meetings have been very productive in terms of fostering better relationships between the city and the tribes. I would, as Mike pointed out, the renaming of Settlers Park is a good step in that direction. I think the land acknowledgements are very important, and then we need to do those more frequently. And with respect to the Fort Chambers site, I'm looking forward to some guidance, as Nicole pointed out, from OSMP and the tribal leaders themselves, to see what it is that they would prefer and what we can do.
Candidate Weiner.
I would definitely support memorializing the Fort Chambers site. When it comes, for me, it's more about how can we get educated? How can we learn? Because their story must be told. Yes, what do the Arapaho people want? That's super important. And the reason why, to me, it's so important to have some sort of a memorial site is because we could use it for a place of remembrance and learning and education. And I think it will be helpful for us to never forget. I mean, in the Jewish religion, we have this Hebrew word called zachor, and it means never forget, like remember. And I think that for me, that's the most important thing, because it was such an atrocity that happened and everybody needs to know about it. I will say that the concept of a sister city for me might be really, if the Arapaho people are interested, might be great, because that would be a way for us to have relationships on a different level. I'm the president of a sister city, and I know that it can
Thank
really
you.
work well.
Next question. This is a two-part question. First part, do you believe there is a climate crisis? And second part, what specific things will your leadership bring to better respond to the climate emergency? We'll start with candidate Decalo.
Perfect. This is my favorite topic. We have been in a climate crisis for the past 20 years, and it's only become more relevant now because we're actually seeing the first force of it. We're seeing increased water vapor in the atmosphere that's leading to increased flooding and hurricaning. We're seeing hotter summers leading to increased drought. We're seeing earthquakes start to happen from fracking, and we're doing pretty much nothing about it. So my experience and studies have surrounded environmental protection, and I promise, if elected, that will be the thing I push the hardest for. We have to increase solar in Boulder. Not every house can have solar, so we have to increase solar gardens across the community. We have to get XL to help pay for this as well. I guarantee I will pressure XL harder than any other candidate to make sure that they provide for this city. We have to look into battery storage technology. We just saw a power outage on our call. We have to look into ways to take energy into our own hands and make sure that we're able to hold on to our power and not have to give it away in case of emergencies. We have to look at geez, I'm already out of time. I have a lot of ways to resolve this issue.
Yeah. Candidate Christy.
Yes, I believe there's a climate crisis. To respond to this crisis, if you look at Boulder's climate action plan, one of the more notable strengths of that plan is the idea of working to pilot new financing options to improve the affordability and increase access to clean energy for all community members. This aligns with Boulder's racial equity plan to strive for more equity and inclusion. I believe that we can also reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions from our 60,000 plus in-commuters if we provide more affordable housing options to our in-commuters. We can accomplish this through infill development and rezoning our underutilized commercial areas. We can also improve the safety and connectedness of our biking infrastructure to get more people on their bikes and less reliant on SOV travel. I would also like to see us move toward a regional electric transit system, and we can look to the federal government's $1 trillion infrastructure package, assuming it passes, of which $39 billion is specifically dedicated to public transit to help fund a regional system.
Candidate Wallach.
Oh, there are so many things we can do. Basically, everything hinges on electrification of our society. That's why with XL, it's very important to keep pushing them towards cleaner sources of energy and producing electricity from sources other than coal or gas. We need to adjust our building codes to move towards net zero construction for all new buildings. We need to incentivize existing buildings to retrofit for electricity instead of using gas. We need to incentivize the use of heat pumps that work on electricity, and we need to electrify our transportation network in full, which means cars and mass transit. So there are literally hundreds of things we can do. We haven't even dealt with restorative agriculture and urban forestation. But as I said, there are a million things we can do, and we need to work on all of them.
Candidate Weiner.
When I first started, when I decided I was going to run like 8 or 9 months ago, I have to say that I knew the least. Even though the environment is the most important thing to me, I also knew the least about climate action and the details. So I appreciate you, Jaques. I've learned so much from you. But I've also met with so many people. I was at somebody's house the other day. He showed me his heat pump. He has a completely, his whole house is electrified and solar. And I met with the city's climate people and I said, teach me, we need to learn. I think that what I've gotten out of it, if I could talk about one topic that people haven't discussed yet, is that we need to have resilience and we need to be flexible because we're already in a climate crisis. So we have to think about fires, floods, air pollution, and water pollution, and the ability to have water when we go forward as a city. And we also have to look at it through an equity eye, because it affects, so it can affect people that are that don't, like, it's expensive sometimes to modernize and to electrify, and we really have to have programs to help those that are in need.
Candidate Speer.
Thank you for this question. Yes, absolutely. The climate crisis is here. Our homes, our workplaces, our infrastructure, even our lives are in danger from things like floods, wildfires, and extreme weather events. These threats obviously have economic consequences like increased home insurance costs and physical consequences. But as a scientist who studies people, I think I have a unique perspective when it comes to the climate crisis, and as Tara mentioned, climate resilience. I'm really concerned that as a community, we're not considering the social infrastructure that we'll need to promote community well-being in the face of the climate crisis. Studies of extreme weather events have shown that people are more likely to die in an extreme heat event when they don't have a robust social infrastructure, such as community centers that bring people together. We really need to fix this by investing in social infrastructure like libraries that strengthen our connections to each other. I think this is why the Sierra Club endorsed me. In a climate crisis that's going to disproportionately affect our most vulnerable communities, it's really important to have people who understand people, justice, and sustainability. Thank you.
Time for our final question of the night. What is your position on the camping ban? What is your position on police enforcement of the camping ban? Please give specifics on how your position will improve the situation, providing evidence such as from other cities that have used similar policies. We will start with candidate Christy.
So I support the camping ban. I believe that it should be enforced with compassion and in a way to get our unhoused population into the services that they need. For example, mental health and drug addiction services. I volunteer at the Boulder Shelter for the Homeless. I am sympathetic to this issue, but as I mentioned earlier, the city cannot do this on its own. We need to look to the state and county for assistance with funding. Boulder already spends about $100 million a year on city and county housing services. And while we need to expand on mental health and drug addiction services, just throwing more money at services itself is not the answer. So let's learn from what other cities have done and what works and what doesn't work. The cities that have failed, Seattle, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, Boston, all those cities focused on services without enforcement. We need a fine balance of enforcement coupled with the right services. The one city that's been successful is Houston. So we should be looking at Houston as a model, and that is what I believe we should be implementing here in Boulder to address this issue.
Candidate Wallach.
I do support the camping ban, and I support enforcement of the camping ban. As I said earlier, to me, it is a core value of any government that the public lands have to remain open to the entire public. And that is not what we're experiencing today, certainly on places like the Boulder Creek Path. But having said that, there is also a great deal of room to stand up programs that will address mental illness and drug addiction and try to provide services for that component of the homeless population, while we also provide housing with respect to that portion of the homeless population that has deep roots in the community. But I think that the example of Houston is very instructive. And I think the counterexamples of the cities that Michael raised are also very instructive as to what not to do. So yes, I do support it.
Candidate Weiner.
I do support the camping ban because I feel like we have to think about the kids and we have to think about the families, and I'm very small. You can't tell by Zoom, but I'm super short, very small. So I get very nervous also when I'm riding my bike and the tunnels are dark, etc. So I do support it, but I will say that you can't have one without the other. You can't solve our homelessness. You can't help people who are experiencing homelessness without talking about mental health, because Colorado has an abysmal record when it comes to mental health. So I would actually like to see, I would love to work at the state level to bring some money for inpatient units and outpatient units, because unless we do both, if we're not going to help those people experiencing homelessness, then we're not going to get anywhere with the problems in our public spaces. But likewise, safety is important. And I think we should balance, like others said, and we can do both. We can.
Candidate Speer.
Thank you. I don't support camping in our public parks, and I know that camping bans only move people without homes from one place to another. This makes it harder for people to access services that will help them get out of homelessness. So the question I'm asking is, how can we quickly get alternative, authorized, safe spaces where people can connect with the services they need so that people without shelter have alternative places to go? Given all we ask the police to do, especially after the trauma they suffered responding to the March King Super shooting, it's not okay to me that we're dumping so many of society's problems onto our police department. Dan Williams and I published a guest opinion in the online Daily Camera today that outlines a few programs other cities are using, like cutting edge treatment for meth addiction and supportive housing, that we think can reduce the need for our police to take on the burden of our city's homelessness crisis. I'd encourage you all to read it. I think it'll come out in the print edition tomorrow. Thank you.
Candidate Decalo.
I do not support, or I do support the camping ban. I don't support camping in our public spaces. It's a endangerment to our citizens. I know a lot of people who feel threatened walking downtown at night by themselves because they have fear of aggression from the homeless people. So we have to look at, if they're not allowed to camp downtown, where are they going to camp? So we have to work with the state and on the federal level as well to bring in higher funds to create areas where if they don't feel like they can go into somewhere and be sober and have a roof over their head, well, they have space where they can camp and be sanitary and have cleaning for them. And then we can build relations with these people in these areas and help get them on their feet, dive deep into their mental health, into their struggles, into their addictions, and find the cause of these issues and the roots of these issues, and work with licensed therapists and licensed rehabilitators to bring them back to their feet and get them wanting to be a contributing member to society.
Okay. Now for our closing statements. We will begin with Candidate Wallach.
Question, how long do we have?
60 seconds.
Only 60 seconds, okay. This is going to be a critical election for the city of Boulder because we're going to have substantial turnover on council. I've been on council for 2 years. I think I've been regarded as someone who does the work, asks the questions, and reaches across lines to try to forge consensus. I hope to do that in the next term, if I'm returned. And, I look forward to making progress on so many of the issues we could not adequately address during COVID, whether it's public safety or homelessness, affordable housing, maintenance of our infrastructure, which we haven't talked about tonight, our economic recovery, and continued preservation of our open space. I think I am positioned and capable of doing that and providing some continuity for the next council as we go forward. And I hope you will support me in November and give me the opportunity to do all of that. So thank you.
Next, Candidate Weiner.
Going door to door, as you've heard me say quite a few times, has really, changed the way I look at a lot of things, because it helped me to see Boulder through many different perspectives. And I appreciate that so much. I actually want to keep doing it if I get on council. I do. You just think outside of the box of your own little bubble and your world gets bigger. Being on parks and being involved in so many city organizations and boards has really given me the experience that I feel that I need to have to be on council. And also, of course, with my complicated job where you have to constantly be working on problems. So all I do is take care of problems. But I would be honored to take care of the problem, to work at these problems in Boulder and find successes, even small successes, just, you know, incremental successes to make this a better place for everybody in this town to live. I hope you'll support me, and I'd love to serve.
Next, candidate Speer.
Thanks again for having us here tonight. As a leader, I create a vision of what we're trying to achieve, and then I empower people to use their expertise and knowledge to create measurable change. When I solve problems, I do so by focusing not only on what we can do to make things better right now, but what work we can start today that will make things better many years in the future. Boulder's leaders did this decades ago when they envisioned our incredible open space system. And I think we can use the same approach to address issues like affordable housing, racism, and homelessness. The future I will work toward has walkable, bikeable, multi-generational neighborhoods with gathering spaces like coffee shops and libraries that strengthen our sense of belonging. People will live where they work and have access to recreation, arts, and culture. The best workers in the world will be eager to live and work here, and our economy will be bustling even in the midst of the climate crisis. And because leaders like me pursued smart investments in flood and fire mitigation, our city will be resilient when disasters strike. To join me in making this vision for Boulder a reality, please visit my website at nicoleforboulder.com. It is also available in Spanish. Thank you.
Candidate Decalo.
If elected to Boulder City Council, I promise to be your climate champion. I promise to fight harder and do everything we can to raise awareness for every step we can do, whether that's on a huge infrastructure update to the city or whether that's just raising awareness about our consumption and how that's affecting our climate. Everything helps and everything does affect our climate in anything we do. Whether that's adding new housing, it has to be built in a sustainable way. It has to be done in a way that combats climate change and actually absorbs carbon while it's being built, and the materials are actually carbon neutral. We have to look into ways to preserve water and enact gray water recycling and enact black water recycling for irrigation, so that way we have larger reserves of water in our state that can be used in events of drought and longer terms of increased heat. One other thing is that we have to do everything we can to switch the modes of transportation to electric. We have to look at going to autonomous electric transportation vehicles for the city. And then we have to look at implementing ways to increase electric vehicles for our commuters and increase bike paths. And there's just a lot we have to do, and I promise to do that.
Candidate Christy.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to the League of Women Voters and to Effa, for having us tonight. I certainly appreciate all of you being here and listening to what we each have to say and what we have to offer. My hope is that you can see from my responses that I'm passionate about making Boulder a safer, more welcoming and diverse community. As I said in my opening, I believe that I can use my skill set, particularly as a mediator, to help bridge the gap in working through some of the most critical issues facing our community, such as public health and safety, housing, climate, transportation. And I'm not here to pretend or fool you all that I have all of the answers to these challenges. I certainly don't, but I promise you that I will listen to you. And I do believe that I can add value to the conversations around the challenges that we face. Again, thank you for being here. I hope that you'll support me, and I hope that you will vote for me come November 2nd. Thank you very much.
And thank you. On behalf of the League, I would like to thank all of our candidates, not only for their participation in tonight's forum, but also for their participation in the democratic process. Running for office and serving as an elected official is hard work, and we really appreciate your efforts. Thank you to our League Candidate Forum volunteers, including the League's invaluable Operations Director, Mandy Nuku, and Elizabeth Crow, our President. This forum will be available for viewing online. Please go to the League's website, that's lwvbc.org, for the link, or visit the League of Women Voters Boulder County YouTube channel. And finally, thank you to all the Boulder County voters out there participating tonight as viewers. It's up to all of us to make sure we respect and work to protect our democratic processes. Too many people have struggled to win these rights for us not to use them. It starts with being an informed and active voter. To check out other important issues affecting our community, see our League Voter Information website, that is vote411.org, for all the election information you need. The League of Women Voters of Boulder County works throughout the year, not just election season, to help empower voters and defend democracy. If you want to lend your time and skills to encourage civic engagement in a nonpartisan manner, please join us. All the information you need is at www.lwvbc.org. Have a great evening and vote. Ballots are mailed this Friday. The deadline is November 2nd at 7 p.m. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Good night.